So good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited. We're all back from spring break here at UWM's campus. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi land, the Ho-Chunk and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigamme, which is North America's largest system of freshwater lakes where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Knickknick rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We encourage you always to click on some of the resources and see who the native inhabitants were of where you live today. So I also want to highlight, we have a couple of really exciting events coming up. On the 11th, we will hear from folks working on the downtown plan here in Milwaukee, some of their current strategies. They've had a lot of public engagement. They're looking at reconnecting the areas of downtown and great public spaces. So you can join us on, again, April 11th. And we will be in person for our Cosier lecture this year. That'll be April 20th. It'll be 4 p.m. in the afternoon right here at the School of Architecture and Urban Planning. And as we honor Charlie Cosier for his impact on community and planning here in Wisconsin, we are really excited to bring in Bill Quackenbush. He's from the Ho-Chunk Nation. And so he's going to share native planning principles as they look at preservation along with development, some of their principles and how that can relate to everyday principles for those of us in current planning practice. So relating the two aspects together, we're really excited to share sort of his knowledge and experience working in Wisconsin. So welcome again today to Ray Hill. We're excited to have Ray joining us today. She's the executive director of the Historic King Drive right here in Milwaukee. And she's going to talk about the renaissance that's happening right now. If you haven't been over there, there's development that's been occurring the last few years, and she's going to highlight some of the strategies for past planning efforts, but also currently what's going on. It's quite complex with partnerships and funding, and so we're excited to hear about that. And as I think Alderwoman Coggs always says, how can this be the best King Drive in the nation, right? So thanks for joining us, Ray. And for those of you in attendance, if you have questions or comments, please put it into the chat. And I may interject, or we can wait till the end. Ray's saved some time at the end of her presentation that we can have a great dialogue and go over some of your questions. So welcome, Ray.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you to the School of Architecture and Planning for allowing me to present today. Hopefully you guys stay with me, and I hope I'm not too boring, but I want to really talk about so much of the things that are happening in the Historic King Drive Business Improvement District. So, of course, I don't know if many of you know, Renaissance means rebirth, revitalize, revival. And so quite like many of the commercial corridors in the city of Milwaukee, we've seen a number of both disinvestment and investment. And so today I want to talk about a couple of those strategies that err on more side. We'll talk about the intentional approach related to commercial corridor and the activation strategy. Understand the systems and challenges within neighborhood development. And then, of course, the urban development and the importance of collaboration while preserving the existing culture. So a little bit about the Historic King Drive Business Improvement District number 8. We were created in 1992, so that means that we're 30 years old. We are a quasi-government entity, which means that we are administered through the city of Milwaukee. So members are defined as property owners. So they pay a special real estate tax assessment that is collected by the city at the end of the year, and the city of Milwaukee gives us the funds to operate for the year. In addition, we have an operating plan which we have to submit to the city of Milwaukee, and that's how it's maintained. We are one of 31 bids in neighborhood improvement districts in the city of Milwaukee. And our mission is to improve and revitalize the district and bring additional investment and new businesses to the area. In addition to that, in 2017, we were designated a Main Street through the National Main Street Program. That is administered also through the state, through the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Let's talk a little bit about the geographical boundaries of the area. So hopefully you can kind of see this large map. It's about 3.5 miles from north to south, and north is to the right of your screen, south being to the left. And then about another 1/2 mile in its entirety in terms of boundaries. So we go all the way up to Capitol Drive to the north, to McKinley to the south of the district. We capture all of the River Walk, and then we go west on North Avenue to the freeway, and then about 5th Street west on Center Street as well. So this gives you a good aerial snapshot of how much land we have in the district, which also changes in terms of nodes from everything from the River Walk to Schlitz Park downtown, all the way to closer to the side of the expressway on 43 up to Capitol Drive. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the King Drive Business Improvement District, or at least area in general. So the King Drive neighborhood in the 1800s, German settlers migrated to Milwaukee, and they built a sustaining economic zone or retail district that was previously known as 3rd Street. By the 1900s, the southeastern portion of the community took more of an industrial character just because of the close proximity to the rail and the river. So it encouraged manufacturers to relocate in that area. So in the 1920s, the area became increasingly diverse. And so many African-American families began to migrate to that area and settle in the neighborhood. So over the last 60 years, the King Drive neighborhood has experienced not only urban disinvestment, but also the urban renewal that took place from the building of the freeway, as well as the expansion of Walnut Street. So by mid to late 1900s, you see many industrials and factories leave. And so you start to feel that economic disinvestment happening in the area. However, in the last 20 years, this says 15, this slide is about 5 years old. In the last 20 years, we've seen renewed interest in the area and slated reinvestment. So over the past 30 years, we've seen about $400 million in investment from multifamily commercial development to revitalized commercial properties and industrial buildings to the reconstruction of Schlitz Park, in addition to another $200 million coming in the next 3 years between the Thrive On, which we'll talk about a little bit later, development, and the public museum that's also coming to the area with that new project. I mentioned that we are a designated Main Street. So part of the strategy that we use as an organization is our transformation strategy by the 4 points of the Main Street. It's always captured by the community vision at the top and understanding the market to quantitative and qualitative outcomes and strategies. So we break these down by 4 elements. The organization, so we have a very strong board support system, that also includes volunteerism as well. So we recruit people to sit on our committees to help govern and make strategic decisions about the area based on these committees and board governance. Promotion, so we have to market the district and defining assets. So we have to make sure that we're promoting the area and activating it to bring new visitors and people in, and also supporting the residents in which the commercial corridor surrounds with these strong neighborhoods that it rests in the middle of. And of course, we like to communicate the unique stories that happen in the area, talking a lot about the history and some of the things that happened before during the whole Renaissance. Bronzeville is a huge element to that, as well as talking about the multitude of different neighborhood organizations that surround it. Design, we are, of course, historic King Drive district. So that means that many of our commercial assets are historic, everything from the commercial building infrastructure to the Cream City brick, to the accessible public centered and public spaces. We want to make sure that we are creating an inviting atmosphere for a place for individuals to just be. And last but not least, of course, we are built upon a strong economic vitality. So that is for us to continuously build a strong and diverse economic base, to think about new catalytic investments and cultivate a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem. So we have everything from major multi-million-dollar developments to our smaller local businesses that offer niche services. So we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. So let's get into the commercial corridor activation strategies by way of investment. So because we are, again, a quasi-government entity and we're funded by special real estate tax assessments, our budget is what our budget is. But one way that we can help move some of our projects along, some of our smaller local businesses, is to leverage those partnerships with capital. And so one of the ways that we do that is by these are just 4 of the components that we have used, which is the City of Milwaukee Department of City Development. They have a commercial revitalization grants program, and that's broken up in 3 components. One, the facade grant, which is anything exterior for the front, the storefront. Excuse me. To the signage grant, so you can get a grant for your sign if you're a retail space. And then the storefront activation grant, which is basically white boxing that space to make it usable for retail activation. Those grants are reimbursable. Again, they're administered through the city, but we are an advocate and the liaison between that. In some cases, we can also pair or layer some internal funding with those reimbursable grants. The second thing we have is the North Shore Bank and King Drive Loan Fund. So those boundaries that I talked about, that 4.5 mile, everything from Capitol, McKinley, to the freeway on North Avenue up to 5th Street and Center, any business that's located in that area is eligible for the loan fund. It is $10,000 at 2% interest. So again, that's another pair and layering for any retail space. Of course, there's some contingencies with that to make sure that the uses are appropriate and befitting within the guidelines, but anyone in that boundary can take advantage of that loan fund. And so in 2022, we did about $40,000 in loans. So that was about 4 of those small loan funds that we underwritten with WIBIC as a partner, which is a local CDFI in the district. The third is the the Bruce City Match program. So that is a program that was administered by LISC with some major grant funding through Chase Bank. And so in 2022, we gave out $180,000 in grants. Those grants were segmented in 3 components. One was for pre-development, so anything related to design, pre-construction costs. That was non-reimbursable, so it was just a $5,000 grant. Construction grant, that was up to 30%, capped up to $20,000 per space. And then, of course, marketing grants. So everything from marketing collateral, website development, signage, anything that could assist in marketing the business or the property, those grants were administered as well. We are a part of the Bruce City Match 2.0. That is specifically for larger commercial developments coming for this year. But we did see major increase in some of our new businesses. And so one, as you see at the bottom to the left, is Honeybee Sage. This photo was taken during her construction. She is now open. She's located at 1819 North MLK Drive, where she sells an abundance of teas and non-alcoholic drinks. And it's a place to be, but it also is her second location, and it gave her an opportunity to take her business, her retail space, and then also create an experience. And so she was able to layer that with both the city grants, the North Shore Bank and King Drive Bid Loan Fund, as well as some Brew City match funding. In addition to that, I know I talked about the Main Street, we're a Main Street, and a part of that was the strategies. But in addition to that, we also have a design team that we work with through WEDC. And what they can do is create design facade renderings that cost about $5,000 to $7,000 in value to give you a perspective of what that space could look like if that facade was redone. And most of the time they work on historical structures. So this is just an example of one at 1806 North Martin Luther King Drive. This is Dream Lounge Social. This is a proposed rendering here. So on the left of the screen, you get to see what it looks like existing. It was previously the Triple OT bar, and now it is, he's proposing it to be Dream Lounge Social. So this was the mock rendering that was done by the Main Street design team.
So Ray, one sort of comment and question as you talk about all the projects. There's a question if the existing property owners are concerned about all the investment and how that might impact their property taxes, and ultimately is there concern about gentrification, and how's the bid sort of managing those concerns?
Yeah, so that's always a concern, especially when dealing with so much investment. One of the ways of tackling that or looking at that from a broader perspective is just being mindful of the new investment that's coming. So that's why we work specifically with a lot of the local businesses to ensure that the properties that they're in maintain quality investment and work with a lot of the other organizations to help leverage the amount of funds and capital. The other part of that too is that we have a significant amount of a city-owned property. So there's a large amount of city-owned parcels as well as buildings in the district. And part of working with that is ensuring that that development happens in more of a strategic manner. And so a lot of the RFPs that are issued, they happen in a slower state. So for many people, it's like, hey, we want to see investment. We want to see things happening, moving quickly. But a part of reducing, or I believe getting away from the displacement, is to make sure that there's more intentionality happening with the reinvestment. So hopefully that answers the question. Oh, right on time. System and challenges within neighborhood. Oh. I don't think it likes me anymore. There we go. Systems and challenges with neighborhood investment. So kind of right on cue in terms of what are some of the challenges that are in the neighborhoods. And so like I indicated that we do have a significant amount of vacant land parcels as well as some blighted property. So I'm just going to talk about the vacant parcels for a second. Some of the challenges in terms of redeveloping that, most of them are owned by the city. We work closely with the Department of City Development to try to make sure that that development happens and it's more intentional, which means that it is focused around the other developments that are happening in the area. But we also have to be mindful of the infill development. So that means that some of these parcels may be 1/4 of an acre large. And so that development has to be feasible for new construction. Another challenge that comes in there is construction costs. We're seeing costs fluctuate, right? The cost of what it would take to build a 24 unit or a commercial building and space at 20,000 square feet or 3,000 square feet is significantly different than it is or has been in the past 3 years. So we're seeing an increase in construction cost, and we're also seeing projects scale back and or just reconfigure entirely just based on the amount that it takes to do construction. And one thing that we talk about is brownfield. So Milwaukee has a significant amount of brownfield. Almost all of the parcels are in some ways contaminated, whether they have old foundations, contaminated soil, just a host of other things. The additional costs that come with that. So you may get a parcel or a piece of land for $1 sold by the city, but there's still a 10 to 15,000 excavation cost that comes with it. Installing sewer and water laterals, that's another 10,000. And then of course the unknown cost of utility and pole removal or relocation that can also affect the land before you even start doing actual construction. So that is a challenge for sure in the neighborhoods in terms of, or excuse me, on King Drive and how it affects the neighborhoods. The photo to the bottom right is a historic building. This building is up for RFP. It's been up for request for proposal through the city twice. It is locally designated historic since it was built in the late 1800s. It's had years of disinvestment. It's sat there for over a decade. Of course, one of the other challenges for this, in addition, to it being designated historic, that means that there is specific historic scope that you have to follow. So you can't just install new windows. They have to be by the historic designations redevelopment. So that means that you can't just put any type of windows or trim. There's just a host of different things that you have to be mindful of in doing redevelopment or adaptive reuse that are designated historic. There's certain heights that you have to be consider in terms of redevelopment. Also want to point out, if you could just look at the photo, you could tell that there's been a significant amount of windows, of course, on it. There was previously a building structure in the rear that was torn down. But if you stand on the first floor, you can kind of look up and see the roof. So again, the cost burden to develop is in addition to the fact that there's a host of other elements that it'll take to revitalize this building. Part of that is to maintain the character that is there. So that Cream City brick, a lot of that historic design is there, but also to ensure that the uses are also within scope of the neighborhood. And so want to make sure that it's in line with the rest of the area. So talked about the challenges. Let's kind of go through some of the assets. And so part of identifying assets is really, charrettes have been a really huge part of the area. And so this picture to the right is a focus of just kind of a map of sites. And this was the 5-point charrette that was done in 2018. That kind of gives a focus on some of the 6 sites that were proposed for development. There have been a significant amount of charrettes that have been done. 2 were done in 2013 that have actually had sites that have came to fruition. Of course, then there's been a couple that have been with the Riverworks design redevelopment, and of course, the Bronzeville area redevelopment of 2013. This is in partnership with Community Design Solutions through UW-M. Of course, there's been partnerships as well as the BID, Riverworks development, the city of Milwaukee, and of course, area stakeholders and residents that are in the area that focus on a lot of these charrettes. And so we'll talk about a couple of those examples, which is, this one was from the Bronzeville area redevelopment charrette. So this is Brooks Plaza. And so if you guys are familiar with North Avenue and MLK Drive, this is focused on that corner parcel that previously had Walgreens. Walgreens was redeveloped and moved about a block, half a mile to the north on Locust and MLK. And so Brooks Plaza was left there as an existing structure. And so part of the charrette was talking about some of the focus group conversations. So a combination of residents and area stakeholders of what that space could look like and what value it could bring to the area. One of the uses came to be a possible entertainment or retail space or a grocery store. And so there's a longer story, of course, that talks about the difference between what was initially proposed there by the developer, which was a Dollar Tree, which offered some level of grocery, but it did not fit into the original discussion of what that use was going to be once that developer made that purchase. And so a couple of community organizers, as well as spearheaded by Alderwoman Coggs, that really stated that the neighborhood needed a full service grocery store. That conversation led to community meetings with the Commissioner of Department of City Development, along with many others who felt the need that they really wanted to see fresh fruits and vegetables in their neighborhood. So in 2017, Fruit Market opened its doors. So just a lot of community activism and communication as well with the private owner, local developer, and they were able to find a Pete's Fruit Market, and this is their second location that opened in Bronzeville in 2017. So just an example of how an idea can come in, people can talk about possible uses, and then of course, it actually comes to fruition. And it does take time. There's just layers and layers of participation, as well as investment that's really important that happens in the area. And you want to make sure that when you're redeveloping or developing in the area, that there's full transparency and participation across the board. Here's another example of development or redevelopment, this is on North Avenue. So to the right of your screen, or excuse me, to the left of your screen, that would be closer to the freeway on 7th and North, and to the left would be the east side towards MLK Drive. So this is between 6th and 7th Street with the proposed use large site. And so the request for proposal was issued to the city last year. So in October, Michael Auditorial's Fit Investment Group and Lutheran Social Services won the RFP for developing this site that will bring 54 units of 54 affordable housing units, in addition to a first floor activation space, which will also capture a cafe as well. So again, another opportunity where this was a part of a charrette. It went out for proposal because it is a city-owned site. The city put a request for proposal, and they responded and won that request for proposal. So I believe they are working in terms of finding financing and closing, if they haven't already closed, the first half of this year. A couple more charrette developments. This is actually only half of them. There's been several other developments that either have happened or are slated to happen based on some of the charrettes that have been proposed. The Garfield School and Griot Apartments, which also includes the Black Holocaust Museum. That is a total of 71 affordable housing units located above the museum, and that's on North Avenue in Val Phillips. The Coakley building is currently being redeveloped as Thrive on King, which is a partnership between Royal Capital as the owners of the development, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, and the Medical College of Wisconsin. That will also house 90 units in addition to a first floor community space. This third photo is on 5th, right off of Locust Street. This is the Enterprise Center and Welford Sanders Loft. That's about 60 units and about 200,000 square feet of office space. So Class B office space as well in the Enterprise Center. And last but not least, this is a proposed project, the Martin Luther King Jr. Library project, which is slated to happen this year. That is 93 units with the first floor activation space of the actual library. And last but not least, creative ways of urban development and the importance of collaboration while preserving culture. So we talked about a couple of the shred examples and how they influence the area, but there's one particular district that's within our district called the Bronzeville district. And so in this Bronzeville area, Pete's was an example of how the Dollar Tree was going to be the actual retail on that catalytic corner of North Avenue and MLK. Well, because that is the entryway to the Bronzeville district, the alderwoman thought it would be great to be able to really be intentional about some of the development that's happening while incentivizing developers to develop a lot of the opportunity that's in the area. So the Bronzeville overlay was proposed. There was a planning advisory group developed between the City of Milwaukee Department of Commercial or Department of City Development, the bid, and then of course a lot of business owners that surround that overlay parcel. Why create an overlay, as I stated, to make sure future development supports the growth of Bronzeville as a culture and entertainment destination that highlights African-American arts and culture. The overlay sets the rules and standard for design and land use. And so here's a photo of the overlay district boundary. So it's significantly smaller. It is only it's less than a quarter of our district. It only captures to the freeway on North Avenue to the left of the screen for bearing purposes, and then to the right of the screen is 2nd Street. So it goes a little bit past MLK. But the purpose of that is to make sure that that specific corridor that's designated the Bronzeville Culture and Entertainment District has uses as well as designs that reflect the district. So we kind of talked about this as well, just some of the plans. So in addition to the overlay study, talking to community members, the planning advisory group was looking at a lot of the plans that happened. So in 2018, there was the transit-oriented development study that was done that really talked about the streetcar extending its way up North Avenue. There was the comprehensive plan, the Northeast Side comprehensive plan that was done in 2009. And then of course, this just gets a snapshot of that Bronzeville charrette that was done in 2013. So this talks about permitted uses for the overlay, which really is specific to retail, and it kind of gives a whole list of what that retail looks like. What the multifamily residential redevelopment or development would look like, just ensuring that that first floor does not have residential on North Avenue and MLK, but making sure that it's active. Personal instruction schools for music, art, theater, and dance, again, bringing that culture element, and other cultural institutions are permitted uses. Prohibited uses are child care centers, the single and 2-family homes, so single families and duplexes, drive-through restaurants, payday loan stores, pawn shops, auto parts stores, other liquor stores and smoke shops, and cell phone stores. And of course, the land use goals support the vision for the arts, culture, and destination, expanded mixed uses, including retail, like we just talked about, and really focusing on entertainment and any type of uses that are complementary to the district. So really the incentive was to ensure that the multifamily mixed use developments support the businesses that are in the area. And so that also gave additional density maximum to developers. So I don't speak zoning, so I will explain it in the way that I know how, and that meant more flexibilities in types and number of units and more projects that are financially feasible, meaning that they can go higher in terms of height. So normally it's 60 feet, they could go up to 70 feet with the overlay. So building up to capture more of the multifamily units and still having that first floor retail use that is specific to the area. So again, that's the Bronzeville overlay strategies, or the snapshot at least, that particular area. That does not cover the entire MLK districts, but of course, again, from North Avenue, 2nd and North Avenue, all the way up to 7th and North Avenue. So we talked about a lot in a very short period of time, but we talked about the collaborative investment and the intentional approach related to commercial corridor activation. So again, collaborating with layering and leveraging those capital partnerships. So trying to layer that money as best as possible to ensure the smaller developments, the smaller businesses are able to open and be prepared to have storefront activation. We talked about the challenges within the neighborhood development, where we identified the neighborhood assets with charrettes and really taking a futuristic look at how we can redevelop the corridor holistically. And then development and the importance of a collaboration while preserving the culture. So that Bronzeville district, trying to see more development without removing the cultural components of what makes that area so unique. So again, that overlay and incentivized development. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Everybody's virtually clapping, right? If you have other questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can turn on your camera and speak up. But one other thing I wanted to just have you address a little bit is the infrastructure side of it, because I know for many, many years, the design of the street for MLK was 2 lanes of traffic, very tight,
Yep.
didn't feel safe, there were accidents. And I know there were lots of design strategies that failed because of county and state, right, impacts. And finally, you know, it was implemented over the last couple of years to reduce the number of travel lanes, add a bike lane. It has a completely different feeling as you drive through. So that probably was before your time, but I know you were engaged in some of those discussions. Can you just talk about that as a strategy? Both challenges, but then also the benefits to changing that street design and how it's impacted businesses.
Yeah, so, and thanks for bringing that up. I wasn't there exactly when the restructure of the street happened. However, changing the lanes from 4 to 2 with the middle turn lane has significantly decreased the amount of just the fast driving through the thoroughfare, right? Most people are using MLK to get from the north end to downtown. And so we would see traffic just flying by. And so with reducing that lane and adding that bike lane and that turn lane, it's just naturally reduced the amount of traffic that happens. Of course, we've seen in the last 2 years, of course, an increase of just the difference in driving across the city. And I think that's just across the board, but I think it's significantly created that walkable corridor to really encourage people to not necessarily drive as fast, but to get out the car, be able to park, get out the car and walk the corridor without feeling like you're on, the side of an expressway. The bid has done an extensive streetscape plan with HNTB as well. There are some elements of that has been implemented or will be implemented by the end of summer of this year. That does include certain bump outs on the southern part of the corridor to, again, increase the safety aspect of traffic and, of course, increase the willingness of walkability. So that's a major thing that has happened. And so the streetscape plan is a pretty comprehensive plan, and it's going to happen in phases. But one of the main goals of that is, one is for beautification. So to make sure that the drive looks great. The second thing is to increase walkability. We want to make sure that specifically on the Main Street corridor where there's several businesses, we want people to be comfortable in walking the corridor. And then the last thing is sustainability. So we want to ensure that, that businesses are protected from just the overall traffic flow. So there has been a lot of investment in terms of the streetscaping element as well.
So there's a couple other questions. One is somewhat transit related, right? Where are they at with potentially extending the hop? I know, that's always in the news. And are there other ways to increase mobility? And then there's also a question like, is there a vacant parcel or building that you still want to see developed, even though there's a lot happening right now?
Yeah, so I'll start with the streetcar. I have not heard too much of the extension happening, specifically up King Drive. Like I mentioned before, we did have an extensive study done in 2018 that took a look at what would happen to the rest of the corridor if the streetcar was extended. And we do know that it will cause an increased investment as well as property taxes. And so we want to make sure that we're also prepared for that on the commercial side. But we haven't heard too much, or at least I haven't heard much about that conversation still continuing to happen. I think there's other modes of transportation too that has been uplifted or active, one being the shared bike system. So we're seeing more bubbler stations being installed as well in various pockets of the corridor to ensure that connectivity is not just the north side, but it's also the north side to downtown, to the river, to the west side. So we're seeing more of the bike share for sure in the area. And then what was the last question you mentioned?
Well, they're asking, is there
the vacant parcel?
Because I commented in the chat, I've worked on that center and MLK building several times in my career, and it just keeps deteriorating more and more, but it's such a beautiful building, great location. It's just now you're going to need to find a partner with deep pockets because the building is such a challenge. But is there a favorite site that you'd like to see developed?
That is actually one of them. I think just because that's also a pretty catalytic corner. It's also kind of rested in the middle of the district where we have so much opportunity on the northern end as well, closer to Capitol. I would love to see more of that infield as well. But I also want to stress the fact that a lot of the development in terms of the land and buildings doesn't necessarily have to be new buildings, right? Some of that could be additional activation or spaces that are just places for people to be and not necessarily new structures. Victor Over Violence is a park is an example of that. And it's going through revitalization as well, but has been a slow moving thing. And so when you think about active spaces, it's been challenging in urban development to really push it. I think part of that is to be mindful of the uses as well, of who's going to use it. How do we market this? How do we program this? The funds that go with it, because if it's not a structure, how does it make money? So there's just a variety of different things, but I would love to see the entire corridor active. But I would have to say that that particular parcel, center and MLK, I would love to see that redeveloped. I would love to see it as like a boutique hotel, but that's just my personal preference.
Mhm.
You go 2 stories up and you get like a total view of downtown. So
yeah, we looked at outdoor for apartments up above. It's
Mhm.
pretty spectacular view. So I think it's really important point about the revitalization of existing buildings, because if you look at the infusion of Bader's headquarters and then the redevelopment of that building next to it has been significant for the northern portion. I've obviously been fortunate to work on this whole district on various buildings, and a lot of it has been adaptive reuse, helping business owners understand, facade enhancements. But you guys were strategic about extending and expanding the bid boundaries. How important do you think that is to the bigger picture, and what challenges did you experience in doing that process? I know that was under Deshay, but do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, so I think previously the boundaries ended on MLK and Locust. And so I don't know if many people know, I worked at the bid as the associate director, so I got to work under Deshay's tenure. So I have some familiarity of what was going on at the time, a little pre me, but post him. And so along with that, with Bader coming to the area, I think the overall thought was to ensure that development continued to happen, but in a more strategic manner. And I think that's just kind of the overall purpose of bids, is to really help govern and steward development that is beneficial, not just to the commercial corridor, but to the neighborhood as well. And so that's why when we talk about like the charrettes that you do, Carolyn, like having those conversations of not just the design of the buildings, but also the uses, right? What do people want to see? What would they go to? What's a need? All of those things matter. Doesn't mean it's going to always happen. It takes a significant amount of time and investment. But I think being strategic about what that vision is, and also utilizing the data that has been provided as well, that how can you really make an active corridor by supporting the neighborhood that it surrounds as well. So that extension from Locust to Capitol really was wrapped around the fact that there was additional investment coming from Bader. We wanted to, in terms of them locating their headquarters there, right? Because that was catalytic development. Now you have Sam's Place, which was another redeveloped parcel. There's King's Hall, that is an active event space that is having conversation and redevelopment, as well as they're continuing to rent out their hall, but need to do some upgrades as they've been there for 13 years. And then other land parcels as well that lends a ton of opportunity, but also just want to be thoughtful of what that neighborhood looks like as development continues to happen.
Yeah, we worked with King Hall over the last couple of years on their outdoor space as well. And so that was interesting that there was such a demand for warm weather events. So expanding, and it also put a lot of eyes on the streets. That's a very busy section of King Drive. Traffic is moving quite quickly, but it was really great to see his immediate investment to activate that space. And it became a little bit more of a destination within the corridor as well. So do you want to just, as we close out, here's another one. What are your thoughts on the grocery? With Pete's Market, I assume Belle is asking about. Oh, no, she's talking at Locust. Do you want to take a look at that question? What are your thoughts on the grocery at the corner of Locust and MLK? Do you see it as an asset to the community or something more complicated, right?
Oh, are we talking about Little General? Little General, funny thing is Little General has been there for such a long time. Uh-oh, I lost my screen.
You can stop sharing if you want and just chat.
They have been there for such a long time, and they were actually one of the first owners to sign for the bid. So 30 years ago, I got to look at the original resolution. And so I think what's happened, if you walk inside of Little General, it looks exactly the same as it did in like the early 90s. And so part of that is one, really having conversations with them to talk about what some redevelopment looks like and some updating. Two, being mindful of some of the neighborhood residents who may have or need additional mental wellness services as well, that typically either patronize the store or like to hang out in front of the store due to familiarity. And so he's trying to figure out how to continue to do business while not necessarily displace some of his regular customers. And so I think that's always an opportunity of partnership. And so any way we can have conversations, and we've started them in terms of just making sure that the exterior of his building as well as the interior get a little bit more of an updated love so that way he can be more befitting in the area.
Yeah, those are challenges, right? Also, can the owner afford required improvements at the same time you're responding to customers and area residents? So yeah, it's beyond that economic discussion, right? So again, if there's more comments, feel free to chime in and chat. But if you wanted to, in closing, do you want to highlight a little bit of the Thrive On project, just where that's at? I know that's been in the media quite a bit, but it's a fairly significant project. Also came from the original charrette, but exciting to see all that. But that's a lot of partnerships, obviously, to make a project that scale move forward.
Yeah, and I think we're still learning as well as being, with it being in the district, of what that will look like when it's all completed. I think it's been a really huge catalytic example of how partnerships can take place, especially when you're thinking of such a huge site such as the Coakley building, which was the former Schuster's and Gimbel's building, and kind of like, what does that look like, right? And it's six stories, so it's a little bit of housing. There's going to be some office there, childcare, early childcare center, and then interested to really be able to promote and activate that first floor community space, which is going to be, I think, for us, or at least the bid, one of the things that we promote the most. And so as Thrive On is building in terms of the actual structure and how they're renovating it, how they're adapting in the community is important as well. And so they're very, they have office hours or tea time that they do once a month at Sam's Place to really talk about the development as a whole. So I think their thought on actually community activation and engagement, I think, has been really important and great to see.
I think that's the success really of all the projects we've been talking about. Early on, we had brought in business owners, residents, but also we wanted to understand from developers what were their concerns so that we understood the opportunities, but also some of the challenges. And the city has responded to some of those, the bid has, and the neighborhood has responded. So I encourage anyone who hasn't driven through the corridor, or you maybe don't live over on the east side, to make a point of coming over there. There's a lot of new businesses, small businesses, locally owned, as well as some of these larger redevelopments. So it's exciting to see that transformation, and it's guaranteed employment for Ray. You're going to be busy for a while working on all these projects, right? So Jenny will put a little survey in the chat for those of you who are on, and we really encourage you to tell us what you thought of today. Obviously, we had a great presentation by Ray and sharing all of her experience and knowledge, but also ideas for future lectures. And just a reminder that the next Innovative Cities lecture virtual will be April 11th. You're going to hear about all the plans happening for downtown Milwaukee as part of their update. And then we hope to see many of you in person on April 20th at 4 p.m. right here at the school. And those registration details were in the early links, and you can always find them on our website. So again, thank you so much, Ray. This has been really informative, because I think for those that aren't familiar with the district, there's a lot that goes into it in terms of regulations, but partnerships, and it takes a while to see all the projects, but has a significant impact.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. It was great doing this.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. I see your chats.
Yeah, that's how we do it these days, virtual. Right? And Jenny will be sharing a link of the recording for the presentation if you want to follow up and see some more of the details. So thanks. Hope to see everybody on the 11th. Have a good week.
Thank you.